Welcome to the Volk Furs Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Volk. The fur trade has a rich history dating back to the 1500s. How has it survived, and what is the future? I will take a look at the history of the fur trade, in-depth discussions on various topics pertaining to trapping, fur fashion, interviews with industry experts, and much more. If you are addicted to fur, this is your podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Volk Furs Podcast. I am your host, Garrett Volk. We are here with the 7th episode, and we have Ed Schneider from Kansas Trapline Products on tonight. We're going to talk a little trapping background. We're going to talk some coyote trapping. I know the market's kind of dead right now, but you know, I'm a big coyote trapper. I like to chase coyotes. I know Ed is too. So talk a little bit about that. Hopefully we get into maybe going into a little bit of some trapping classes, as far as I think Ed's done some classes in the past. So we'll get into that a little bit. Talk about, is there any fur usage in Kansas? I'm not sure if there is or not. We'll talk about that, and maybe have some time for his YouTube channel and what his outlook on trapping is, and just whatever else we come across. So that's kind of what we're looking to talk about tonight. So Ed, welcome to the Volk Furs Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate your audience taking the time to listen in tonight.
So what's the weather like down in Kansas right now?
We're pretty blessed. Certainly, everything's greening up. It's just starting in our area. We're wet. We're wet. Probably 25 mile an hour winds today with another cold front coming in. You know, we're right at that edge that we need things to dry up a little bit as we're all thinking about getting into our planting for the year, you know.
Yeah, we just had about a foot of snow here this last weekend.
Wow.
And we're really white here, and we had a lot of snow in December, and then we kind of had a quiet spell there for a few months, but we have a lot of snow again, and we got another couple inches today, and we're not even close to spring. I mean, the calendar might be pretty close to spring, but we're still in the deep freeze. So
I was going to say that you're a ways away from it yet.
Oh yes, we're quite a ways. You know, last April we really had a bad winter storm up here. I think a couple places around here had 40 inches of snow in about 2 weeks.
Oh boy!
Of course, that time of year it melts fairly fast, so it's not too big of a deal. But you know, when people want to get in the field, it's everybody gets a little itchy that time of year. It's like, when are we going to get in the field? So
that's exactly right.
Hopefully this year, with March has been as cold and snowy as it's been, hopefully April turns out nice and we can get in the field and start working. So anyway, you know, I've seen you on Facebook and social media for a few years, and the first thing I think about with coyote trapping when I'm on Facebook and stuff is I think about Ed Schneider, because I see you post a bunch of stuff, a lot of good videos and stuff like that. So I thought, you know what, I want to get Ed on. I want to talk to him about coyote trapping and whatever other kind of trapping you've been doing, and kind of, you know, what your background into trapping was. I mean, have you been a trapper all your life, or how's that all came about?
Yes. Going back with my own background, I started in 1970, 8-year-old, and started trapping muskrats with a classmate of mine. I think we were better at catching muskrat feet and raccoon feet better than we were at actually getting to keep the fur. But that was how I started out as a young man. And anybody who grew up there, you know, in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, realize how blessed we are today to have so many ways to learn about how to trap whatever animal you want to trap, whether it's a weasel, a mouse, a coyote. There's a lot of good information out there using things like Facebook, YouTube, and that type of stuff. So, that's
what was it like back in the day to try to learn from somebody? Were people pretty tight-lipped on that sort of thing, or?
It was really, in my opinion, passed down from father to son. And I think the first thing that the son learned is if you blab about this, I will break your arm or something. I mean, no one spoke a single word to me. I got lucky. I think we all get lucky. And especially then, those who didn't have the dad. My dad was not a trapper. He was not a hunter. He knew how to hunt and would go with some gentlemen every now and then, but he was not a hunter. So I really had to work hard to even figure out what I didn't know. And but it was you had to find that one person that actually knew what they were doing enough to give you that guidance. Mark Steck, as an example, there in South Dakota, or he was in Minnesota at the time, he talks about this one gentleman that Mark just started following the man around, and I think Mark put it, is the man probably felt sorry for him and just taught him all he could know about mink trapping. He had that one man that shortened his learning curve. And fortunately for that one man, he made a trapper for life with that. Well, I had one man that also helped me. And it wasn't so much, he never took me out. We never did anything, but he gave me that one little tidbit of coon trapping, which was king in the 70s, 80s. That he taught me how to actually make a pocket set. And he was talking about these numbers of, it ain't nothing to catch 30, 35 raccoon a day. Well, that got my ears pursed up. And I says, well, if you don't mind, how do you do that? And, he told me, and well, I was smart enough after that one-on-one conversation, I was able to, next thing you know, I'm catching 30 coon a day. It just took that one person to say something. And then that made me a trapper for life as well, because I'm 60 years old now. So I've been at it a few years, but my progression through my history was muskrat into raccoons. I moved to Northern Illinois. I started to catch a few fox on a very interesting story on the fox. And maybe this makes sense to people, maybe it doesn't, but I'll tell you the secret that this man shared with me, and what he would in the day and time was, everybody moldboard plowed everything, and on the outside furrow, he liked to grab a sprig of fescue that was in the fence line, and what he would do is he would put it right beside the furrow, and then he would put his trap with the dog touching that little clump of grass. And then he proceeded to tell me how to make the lure, which is called my Old Faithful Red Fox Gland lure. But he taught me that too. He was in his mid 70s, near 80, when he taught me that. And so without knowing any different, I had made my very first scent post set, and I was catching fox in Northern Illinois, and then I moved to Virginia, and I trapped in Virginia, and I just kept going. You just keep learning and growing, and next thing you know it, you're starting to be more consistent in your catch. So yeah.
Yeah, when I was, I never really grew up into trapping either. I mean, my dad years ago, he said he had some traps, and I mentioned this in other episodes. He had some traps, and I asked him, I said, well, did you ever trap anything? Well, he said, I had good intentions, but years later, when I started getting into it a little bit, I found his traps, and they were hanging on the wall in the barn. So I think that, that's about the extent of his trapping, but I kind of had the same experience with a neighbor that, one year, and I've always been a hunter. I mean, I grew up on the farm, and, always outside hunting and stuff, and deer hunting and pheasant hunting were my biggest things. And And I got an idea one year I'm going to try trap something. And I went and put I don't know what it was, like a number, like a 1.5 something. I don't remember what kind of trap it was. And there was some raccoon out at the farm. I knew where they were coming by. And like, I'm just going to put this in the ground and put some, like a dirt hole set. And I didn't really know anything about it. And I went out there the next day, and it was dark in the morning or dark. I don't know if it was the morning or night, but I had to check later early. And I see these eyes staring at me. I'm like, oh, great. All of a sudden, I'm like, what did I catch? I didn't know what I caught. And here was a raccoon, and it was pretty fun. I'm like, well, this is really easy, right? I mean, yeah, right.
Oh yeah.
Not hardly, but I think I trapped my first raccoon. I don't know what year it was. And then I didn't trap for years because I didn't have anybody to teach me. Well, then I had a neighbor move in, and he kind of got me into snaring coyotes quite a bit. And then we did some foothold trapping, and I really enjoy snaring more than foothold trapping. But that's kind of how I got into it a little bit. Is just somebody, happened to be along, and it kind of got me going even more than I wanted to go. So I can kind of relate to getting into it that way.
There's learning curves to everything, and if I lived up in your country, I would be waiting to snare. I mean, that's how I would do it. I don't see why I would want to fight your weather too much. You probably get you got a season that you could actually trap, but I could see where snaring could get in a person's blood with how difficult it is to trap in your country. So I mean, you guys can get a terrible snow, have it melt, ice chilling temperatures, have it warm up, and you'd be constantly fighting the traps unless you're fortunate enough to be around some coal shell or some type of ground that doesn't freeze as much, so you'd be fighting it all the time. I had that experience when I was on the Standing Rock Indian Res over there, that I was actually very grateful when the snows came and stayed. It was much easier just to run a snare line than it was to keep the traps working daily. So
yeah, we'd usually start the middle to end of October, and we figured we'd have 2-3 good weeks of good dry dirt trapping, and then deer season starts. Well, that kind of messes everything up. And then if we're lucky, we have a good November some years, and then once it starts getting to have that November freeze and thaw and snow and rain, and it's this foothold trapping's for the birds. So we can't snare up here until deer season's over with. So
okay.
So then if we're kind of froze out of foothold trapping, we got to wait that 2.5-3 weeks of deer season, and then we kind of get into snaring. And then if we get a little bit of snow and get some good trails and maybe some bait stations going, I mean, that's perfect for snaring conditions.
Oh, I'll bet it is. Yeah.
So, let's move on to coyotes a little bit. Coyotes have been so popular in the last 10-15 years, and now the market's kind of went down, and people are kind of cooling off a little bit. And I think maybe some are probably a welcome break for going hard at it for 10 years. I mean, there's a lot of people out there this year that really hasn't chased anything just because the coyote prices are down. But coyotes are mysterious. They're dumb. They're smart, all in one, I think sometimes. And it's just odd to me. I love chasing coyotes, and it's probably my favorite animal to trap, even though some years it's not as plentiful as others as far as catching them, but they're just so fun to trap. And one of the things that always, comes into my mind with coyote trapping is I know there's prey around, whether it be birds or rabbits or mice or maybe some guys got some cattle and there's a bunch of deer and stuff like that. But how do you find a good location for trapping coyotes? Like, what do you look for, and what's the one thing you look when you go in an area that you're not familiar with? You might look at a map, you might look at Google Earth or do something like that. Look at the terrain. Look at Onyx. I don't know if you use Onyx Maps at all. That's a really good app for all that kind of stuff.
It's a great tool.
What do you look for? Like if you came up here where I'm at, I mean, we're relatively flat up here. We're in farmland, and sometimes, in my opinion, trapping coyotes in farmland, like true farmland with not a lot of trees, sometimes can be hard. But what do you look for in a good coyote location? As far as, I'm going to put some traps within this half mile here. Let's go see what looks like good travel ways. What do you look for?
What's your town in North Dakota?
Sherwood.
Sherwood. Hold on one second here. I will be
We're
happy.
2 miles. Yeah, we're like 2 miles from the Canadian border. So
yeah, Sherwood, North Dakota. I'm going to go through this. I wrote the book called One Square Mile, but one of the things I've been very blessed on is.
I read that, by the way. I have to read that again. I read that. I really enjoyed that.
So I'm looking at the map, and if you look at it to where basically you can have maybe 10 counties in view of, and Google Earth is a favorite one of mine. I like OnX too. I see you're just south of Elmore. Elmore, I don't know, is that United North Dakota, or is that on the Canadian side, Elmore?
That's probably on the Canadian side, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. So when I'm looking, let's paint the picture of wonderful farm ground, whether you're just say it's wonderful farm ground and they have the fences out. We don't have any fences anymore because it's great farm ground, and we have really limited amount of trees. In those scenarios, I'll paint this picture first. Just about every crop edge or about any fence line, you can just about bet sooner or later you're going to catch a fox or a coyote, or there'll be one that passes that. Whether or not we catch them is a whole nother game. But I can just about bet most fence lines or most crop edges has a chance of having a coyote eventually go on that crop edge. The secret to getting 100 coyotes, as an example, using that as my example, and if I didn't do anything else other than that crop edge or that fence line, I just need 99 more fences. I hate to make it sound so simple, but in theory, that's a good practice. That is not going to get us to 500 coyotes necessarily, but the big limitation that I believe the trappers have is not having enough land to make a good daily catch in order to bring big daily numbers in.
I see.
I check an awfully lot of empty sets in my day. As an example, even here in Kansas here, an average good day for me is probably 7 to 10 coyotes on an average day. That's, yes, I have the days I catch 15 and I have my days I catch 3 or 4. That's if I'm really running it, and I'm probably running about 170 miles in that day. Now, obviously, I wouldn't have, if I had all the ground, if I had the rights to trap everything, well, I wouldn't have to go quite that much, to get that much. But as we skip around and different things like that, but to break down areas, in my opinion, there are better areas than some. Some fields just simply don't have any more than that 1 or 2 coyotes. Say for many guys that are in the Midwest, say Eastern Illinois, Western Indiana, is some wonderful farm ground, but they don't have any trees. And once you catch that one coyote, I think you're probably better off, as an example, pulling the trap and moving, because it was there. Everything is V-ripped. The farm is worked. They have no cover. So you caught the one coyote that was able to make a living there, and that's it. But looking at Sherwood, and this is something your listeners can do as well, as I look to the west of Sherwood, you obviously must have some form of a creek or branch or something along that line just to the west, about 2 miles from Sherwood to the west.
It's kind of like sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's
That's
wet.
right.
Depends on the spring, of course. So it's a natural natural path for game, I guess.
So the point is, if I had that property, here's the beautiful part about when you can see you're on a potential travel way. Well, I don't want to go in with 1 or 2 sets in that area. I want to load it up 6, 7, 8 sets, 9 sets. Just depends on what the ground can give me. But I am going to follow that creek, and if I could, I would like to be on the other side of the branch or creek as well. I want to load up another 8 or 9 sets on the other side of the creek, because you understand, in my opinion, the way a guy can get more coyotes moving in to your trapping ground is you need to kill the coyotes that are there. So in order to stack them, you need to whack them. Having 2, 3, 4 different options as the coyote's traveling through, we need him dead. Then the next group comes in. Now they might choose to run the ground a little bit different, maybe come in a little more cautious, but we can whack another 2 or 3 coyotes or 4 coyotes out of it the next time they are, So my experience on my one farm that kind of resembled that property we're talking about, that drainage, is I would catch 6 there today. Tomorrow I would catch 1. The next day I might catch 1 or 2. And then all of a sudden, wham, I'd catch another 4 to 6. And I just kept whacking them and whacking them and whacking them. And it was because I understood I was on a travel way, and it's a game of patience in that case. Now, I might have already pulled several sets in between Sherwood and that travel way, but that travel way is important. But if I could continue on to get numbers, seeing how I'm already going west, let me continue looking. If we drive further west from Sherwood, I don't know the road name, but it's probably looking at 1, 2, 3, and in an additional 4 miles, there looks like to be a water structure or something like that. Maybe some timber, or maybe that's wheat. It's probably wheat. I guess my point is that's another location I might start loading up some more traps. And so I would basically figure out a way that I could hit all of these drainages as I'm going through, try to get some permission on that really premium type of ground to where I can cover them. I'll leave my traps there a little bit longer, but again, these other fields that are hit or miss, I might pull the trap on the first day the first time I catch, but I'll keep working my way. That's an example. That's kind of how I work I'm looking for drainages, even if it's just all farm field drainages and nothing too spectacular, without adding a feedlot, without adding a dairy operation or chickens or hogs. I would like to focus on travel ways and try to understand. I want to go, say an example, I want to go west for maybe 70 miles. Then I'm going to turn right around and I'm going to drop south. My goal would be in your part of the country. I see Rossville, Rose Hill Cemetery. There's a drainage. I don't see any towns close by, but there's a drainage.
No, that's the middle of nowhere. Now, right to the east of there, about 2 miles, it's actually a bigger river. We call it the Mouse River.
That would be that was the one I'm referring to. Yes.
Yeah.
That would be another area that I know that I want to get on that as I'm heading. You know what I'm saying? I'm working my way to the motherland. I guess that's kind of how I look at it. And it's a wonderful drainage, and it just tells you that the coyotes are going to, I would hit every drainage that I come to, and you still have your fence lines of the properties you get. You want to, I know where I want to go, but I also want to fill those areas in between, right? So I'm just not all dry. I don't want to get to it. If it's 20 miles from Sherwood to that place, I'm just using that example. Well, I don't want to just drive straight to Sherwood. I want to be stopping along the way, picking up some fur along the way to the promised land. Then I'll drop down south. I'll probably catch Sherwood. I mean, that creek again, the Sherwood again, or the creek again, and I'll start working my way back to home, right? I mean, that's the theory, is I'd like to make a U-turn if I could, and come back home. Make a big horseshoe.
So on these, these little drainages, and this is kind of what we run into up here. The drainage, we have one place, it's called the 7 Mile Coulee, and it's not really a coulee, but it's just a drainage for 7 miles. And,
Yep.
and along the way, there could be some water features along the way, depending on the spring and summer. And we know there's animals run up and down that drainage all the time. Now, with your experience with these animals running these drainages, do they tend to run the whole drainage, or they take a right turn and come back, or
so they can. I think there's. So let's talk about coyotes being territorial, and this is why we're kind of on the topic of. We're talking about, will coyotes run all 120 miles of that drainage? I would say normally I wouldn't expect a coyote without going that far. That being said, when you look out west in Wyoming, Montana, or Colorado, wherever you have the high mountain snow, well, when the elk and the mule deer move down the mountain to the winter mesas, those coyotes are traveling at least 60, 70 miles, 80 miles to get down. They're just basically following the mule deer and the elk down off the mountain, so they can travel a ways. There was a game warden, and there was a game warden in Wyoming who told me that he has seen as many as 600 coyotes in the winter mesa during a very bad winter storm. And I did go in there and trap that property or that area, and I did in 10 days we took 100 coyotes out of that area. But
wow.
but the timing had to be right, meaning I needed the snow up in the high mountains to push the elk and the mule deer down. So now we get into your country. And let's just say that you're running a fairly dry winter and you're running with 4 to 6 inches of snow, that type of a thing. Number one, your coyotes with snow generally seek cover. They're usually going to be where the deer are going to be running and that type of a thing. So keep thinking bunny rabbits. Definitely think bunny rabbits. Think pheasant. Wherever you find the pheasant, wherever you find the bunny rabbits, when it's cold and when you have snow on the ground, they generally go there. That's just the rule of thumb that I've kind of lived by, that the traps that are in the open field, say in October and into November, where you didn't have any snow, yes, the coyotes are still out there doing what they've been doing all summer long, per se. But as soon as the snows hit, coyotes will shift, coyotes will move, and lots of times I'll find where my most successful period was when it was like negative 25 out, and we had 8 inches of snow, and the deer had opened up trails in the bottom of the draws, and we were snaring up. Now we had 300 to 400 snares out, 300 to 500 snares, I believe. And we ended up snaring 14 average a day up there at Standing Rock Indian Res. But we were only doing 3 to 7 a day with traps leading up to that, if that makes sense. It was the coyotes was everywhere, but they were nowhere. So our success went up when all of a sudden everything got congested. So let's get into my beliefs when it comes to territorial response. I think right now, as pups are being born here, if they're not born, they're being born very soon. That is the peak of territorial response in coyotes. When you get all through the summer, your parents are pretty protective. In other words, for those guys that trap one pup coyote, and then they say, well, then I don't catch anything else after that. What I'm talking about, say, a summer ADC job. Well, the reason they're probably not catching anything else is because mama saw their pup in a trap. In her maternal instinct, she probably picked the litter up and moved him somewhere else and got the hell out of the area. So it's very high this time of year, the territorial response, but that response has to drop once fall hits. Otherwise, every pup coyote would be killed by other territorial parents. Do you follow what I'm saying? So in the
Yeah.
fall of the year, I don't really find there being. I want to throw territorial response, in my opinion, all the way out the window. But I think we have a big food shift that occurred at that time. We have two things that happen in the fall that just changes the whole world. Number one, the pups are being dispersed, so they got to go somewhere. They're looking for their own territory. They're looking for food, and I don't think they'll have it until probably January into February. I don't think they actually find home until January or February. So you got your new pups breeding, and they're going to find their own territory around January, February. Well, the response of or right in the fall, what happens after the pups disperse, you also have the combines that took away all their cover. If the farmers do till the ground, all of a sudden your raccoon are gone. They're going to find someplace else to eat because all the corn is, in theory, has been covered up. That's sitting on top of the ground, so on and so forth. So we have a lot of things happening in the fall, and I think that the adult coyotes, the yearling coyotes, the adult coyotes, I think everybody is shifting and moving, and they're all just trying to find a happy zone for themselves to ride out the winter, if that makes sense. They still may have their paired mate, they still may have that with them, but obviously other coyotes are passing through, such as pup coyotes. They're always on the move looking for something. It's not until they're bred, ready to den up, do I see that the territorial response really happens at that time. So in Kansas here in the Flint Hills where I live, we have a grazing season that starts about the 15th of May, and it runs to October 15th, October 30th. Most of the people, they run one cow per 8 acres, or one pair per 8 acres, but whichever type of cattle we're talking, whether they're backgrounding cows or whatever. But they never let the grass get chewed down to the root system. We have a lot of cover at that time. But as soon as those cows leave in October, my goodness, that is a primo time for coyote movement, because all of a sudden their worlds have changed. Most of the cattle a lot of the cows in Kansas in the Flint Hills are now shipped. Those were backgrounded, and now they're being shipped to a feedlot out in western Kansas. So you have all this tremendous movement. Well, now coyotes are saying to themselves, well, let me go find more cows, right? So they're moving and they're moving and they're moving. Yeah.
So, we see quite the migration, I guess, of coyotes. It seems like that middle November time frame, even if the weather's still nice, it's like they just move out, and they know that winter's coming, and they kind of situate themselves around the big cover areas where they know the deer yard up in the wintertime. There's some areas just west of Sherwood, 20 miles or so, there's lots of deer in the wintertime, and there's lots of coyotes. And we were talking the other day about that, and we're like, man, there's so many deer around here. There weren't this many deer around here during the fall. And of course, there's lots of cover, and there's food and such. And there's lots of coyotes. How far do you think coyotes will travel as far as, because, we get winters up here, the wind blows, all the grass and the ditches. I mean, they're level full with snow. There's no cover anywhere up on top. It's all in the river bottom. How far do you think these coyotes would come from? I mean, are they coming 30, 40 miles away?
Oh, I believe every bit that, if they need to. I remember that O'Gorman wrote about a story in his book, Hoofbeats of a Woofer, and it's been a long time since I read it, so the accuracy of the information is probably pretty weak. That being said, I think they had some cows snowed in one of them blizzards, and I mean, we'll just say it's 500 cows that were frozen and dead. And I guess the helicopters and planes went in there to shoot the coyotes, and they killed 600 coyotes
Oh, wow.
out of those cattle. That being said, coyotes will come a long ways to get some, to feed themselves over the winter. Yeah.
That's kind of what we've been seeing because, my brother does a lot of night hunting along with snaring and stuff, and he's been doing a lot of with his thermal scope this winter. And I haven't had a chance to get out much, so I haven't really witnessed it. But he said that where the deer are at, the coyotes are at, and he was just taking coyotes out like crazy, and they're still there. And I'm thinking, there's not that many coyotes around during October. They just must come from wherever the food is at. They just must come. I mean, whether it be 10 miles or 20 miles or 30 miles, that must be the case with that.
And I know the deer get yarding up, but who I'm not a deer biologist. But that being said, who's to say that it ain't the coyotes kind of hurting them in a way? You follow what I mean?
Right.
To where I don't want to say they're hurting them, but it's forcing the deer to yard up. So it's very interesting. That's certainly what happened for me in Wyoming when the elk and the mule deer moved down. And for people that's interested in that stuff, if you really want to understand coyote movement, if you go on Google and you look up Wyoming elk migration route or Wyoming mule deer migration route, well, that's how I did it when I went there. Is I looked, I found that migration routes that I liked, and what I did is then I went and started seeking out permission to trap to get me as close to that migratory route that the mule deer and the elk were taking. And that put me on coyotes just funneling. But like snaring, you can't catch 6 coyotes in a snare of a deer run without putting 6 snares. You follow what I'm saying? You have to hang a lot of snares. Well, trapping is the same way. You have to, when you realize you're on a good area where coyotes are consolidated or something like that, then we need to put out a lot of steel or hang a lot of steel to catch numbers for those choice areas. If it's just flat farm ground, if you've just got turnips here for the next 6 miles, there's turnips in every other field. Well, we can probably put in one or two sets on each fence line edge or crop change, and then we move on the next mile, right, until we do it again. So, yeah.
So, like in this, I got one more question here on these location.
Yeah.
So, the thing is that you get these good drainages, and you might find a good drainage, and what we found is that if you catch a coyote, catch a couple coyotes in one location this year, it seems like every year after that, that's just where they're at. You're going to catch them every single time, every year. I had a couple locations like that years ago before they tore up all the CRP, and then those coyotes didn't come there anymore. But they're just locations that produce. So, and for us, what we've done in the past is, we'll put 2 or 3 traps in the ground and call it good and hope we catch a couple. Are those good locations like that, like you've been saying? Is that something where you just want to put in a dozen or so traps in the good areas, and you're like, I think I'm going to catch more than 2 or 3?
If you're on a drainage that you could see it on Onyx or on Google Earth, if you can see that and it runs for 50 miles, 40 miles, that drainage, and you have a lot of drainages that actually lead right into into Canada. And I mean, it wouldn't be out of the way to have 15 sets picking them off as they come in. Does that make sense?
Right.
I mean, what if the wind was wrong here at this set, and but you can understand how he's traveling. And if you have that creek or that dry creek or whatever, a good waterway, and you have CRP, that is very important. I mean, when you can recognize these extra features that happen. Coyotes eat mice. That's probably the biggest thing that they're going to eat. Mice, pack rats. They'll certainly take rabbits when they can get them. They'll certainly take a pheasant when they can get them. They'll certainly take quail and deer when they can get them. But mice is the absolute staple for most canines out there. Maybe not wolves. I'm not familiar enough with them, but mice is number one for fox and coyotes and bobcats. I know, but everybody says, well, bobcats have to have rabbits. Well, I cut open a lot of bobcat carcasses every year, and I'll go so far as to say that I see a heck of a lot of rats and a hell of a lot of mice that's also in bobcat stomachs. So find brushy areas that will support a healthy mouse population, and if it's on a drainage, you're even better. If it's just that brushy fence line, I'll run to a brushy fence line just as fast as I will to a good drainage. I've been talking about catching 30, 40 coyotes out of one small section. That's what you can do when you have a good drainage. But the brushy fence line, hell, that's worth 2 to 4 coyotes, right? So I mean, it's when you lose cover. Now we're just trapping a traveling coyote, and I don't know when he's coming back or if he's ever coming back, right? So those are kind of a Hail Mary kind of a spot, unless you have cover that coyote is going to. I'll paint a picture here of the way, and this applies to many of your listeners. In Illinois, where I originally grew up, and in Iowa, where a place where I trapped and I lived for a number of years. The way the farm fields are generally set up is you have the road, you have 2 fence lines, and then in the back of the field is where the trees are, or the back of the field is where the branch is, or whatever. Basically, I'm going to set each of those fence lines, but the fence line that really pays off for me is when you look on the other side of the road, and the farmer didn't rip that fence line out either, and it runs to the other set of woods. So in other words, you have woods in the back of the fields on both sides of the road, and in theory, you have a brushy fence line that leads from one brushy area to another brushy area. Well, now we're talking. That's what I would call flatland travelway. That fence line is a lot of times enough cover to keep multiple coyotes using that kind of a ground.
That's some really good visualizations, because I mean, you can just kind of picture it as, kind of a house. You got one bedroom on one end, and you got the kitchen on the other end, and there's a hallway. Yeah, that's what they're using. That's how they're getting there.
That's the Flatlanders version of a travel way, and so that works for you. So there's a lot of opportunities. We just have to realize when am I on a spot that's worth one coyote, and I just need to pull the trap and focus my attention elsewhere, and that type of thing. I think if you're here in Kansas and you wanted to trap, if you wanted to trap for, I don't know, let's say 5 weeks of the year, well, you ought to have at least 3 different locations for that trap. That's kind of my rule of thumb, that if you want to catch numbers, because you're going to catch the coyote, you're probably best off just to pull many of those traps and move them to a better location, because you caught the ones that can earn a living there. And it's kind of the saying here in Kansas: there's a pretty girl behind every tree, but there isn't many trees, right? So
that's heard that one before.
That's the same. Yeah, that's the same thing when it comes to coyotes. There, that if you can find, there's a pretty coyote there on every fence line, as long as you have a fence line. So those are some different rules to kind of go by. So yeah.
So that's some really great information about location. And so the next question here is, and I'm, every trapper's got their most favorite, type of set, and maybe it's because it's, the ground is easy to put it in, or just the features around make it easy. It blends in nice, or or just sees that, or just kind of the way the coyote sees the set, where they're coming from and the wind and everything.
Yeah.
Have you found over the years, if there is there such thing as a foolproof coyote set, as far as something that you're gonna have some success with that type of a set?
Anytime that I have sign where I can identify a coyote is walking someplace, whether it's on that fence line, whether it's a cattle trail, or a deer trail. The only problem with deer trails is we know deer walk on them. But
Yeah.
If I can identify that the coyote, I'll paint another picture here. Let's say that I am driving my pickup. I'm in a soybean field, and I'm driving along the fence line. As I enter the field, I might have a mile to drive down to get to the opposite corner. I'm looking for a spot where maybe the combine the combine head kind of scrapes some soybeans, and I have bare dirt. Now this works whether you're talking corn or whether you're talking soybeans or any other crop. If the combine header took some of the cover off, well, now I have some bare dirt to look at. So I'm on the fence line. I found the bare dirt. I don't care if you're talking about a quarter mile down the field or halfway down the field, but at that spot, I'm going to stop, get out of my truck. I'm going to look over there and see if I find the coyote track. And 99% of the time, I believe I'll find the track there. Well, now I got him. Now it's just a matter of me putting up a simple scent post type of a set. He's walking right there. I'll walk over to the fence line. I'll grab a clump of grass and I'll plant it right next to where the coyote's walking, and I'll tell him to piss there. I think that is the closest to a sure type of a thing, is just putting a trap under where the coyote wants to walk anyway. So that's, yeah, I know. Yeah.
I've tried that. I've seen that, when I'm out pheasant hunting in the fall, I'll, if hunting's not very good, I'm always looking for coyote sign, and some of these dirt minimum maintenance roads, they're very good for that. You see coyotes, and I've had trouble sometimes on these minimum maintenance roads trying to catch a coyote. I think when they're on those roads, they're cruising and they're not really looking for much, but
I've noticed, busy.
And notice that, you find those tracks, that they're at least coming through the area, and then you start looking for some of those cover areas where there's some food at.
The problem with the road that I have is I see the tracks. The best scenario would be to set right where he's walking, but now we're talking about a road that maybe other people travel. So now all of a sudden the problem I get into is now I have to ask the coyote to come to me, and just like you're saying, sometimes they don't want to come to you, right? I mean, everything could be perfect, but he's cruising. I have a lot of video footage of coyotes just trotting right on down the 2-track. I think if I was standing there, I think the coyote would have just walked right by me. I mean, they're just that focused on moving from point A to point B.
Yeah, and that's, I used to think, I could get some easy sets in here, and it doesn't take a lot of time, and it's on my way to my other stuff, and I'm like, I'm just gonna put some in along the road. And over time, there's one spot in particular, but it's closer to some drainages that I can always catch something along the road. But for the most part, it's like those coyotes that are on those roads, they're just, they're going somewhere, and they're not taking the time, or they're in the mindset of, I'm not gonna wait around here for anything. I got to get over to this other spot. I'm checking something out. And I've kind of shied away from those sets over the years, just because it just seems to be a waste of time. I mean, if you have extra time, I suppose you can put one in and maybe, get lucky. But that's interesting. I've never really talked to too many people about that, because I've always just kind of thought, maybe that's the case, but maybe there's some truth to that. They're just out cruising, and they're not looking for anything.
There's things that I do, that I like to do to get the coyote to pull over if it's possible. And one of them is simply putting in a trench set, which I would take the Polanski. I would start, say I found the tracks. Now I'm looking for something that's kind of brushy. I need to get that coyote's attention with some fresh dirt. I find the clump of tall grass, and I'm going to put a T-bone set or whatever. It's basically a T-bone in the grass, and I'll start the Polanski, and I want to make my trap is 6 inches wide. It's a number 3 trap, so we got 6.5 inches wide. Well, that's the width my trench needs to be. So I will actually start whacking, kind of put the Polanski between my leg or kicking it between my legs. And I want to make the trench all the way out to where I see the tracks. I literally want the coyote to step into over my trench. And then it needs to be about 2 inches, need to be about a 2-inch step down. And then basically the coyote, then he sees all that dirt that's kicked up. Hopefully he'll step in the trench. He'll smell that odor. Hopefully I already got him intrigued by what's all this dirt kicked out into the road. I make a heck of a mess is what I do. And basically they will walk right down that trench. And you set your trap just outside of that clump of grass and you have them. I mean, my T-bone might be 18 inches into the grass, but my trap is sitting just outside of it, and hopefully we'll get him to step right there, So I might put some scat right on my dog or something like that just to whoa him. And as he's going into that, those kind of sets, I kind of when I need to get a coyote's attention, I try to go loud.
Right. So you're basically just trying to say, okay, Mr. Coyote, I know you've been by here 5 times in the last week and you just keep going, but I'm going to give you something different to look at. And they're curious.
That's it. So that's it. Make it loud and proud. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's interesting information. I mean, I think we could talk about coyote sets and strategies probably for 3-4 hours. And
I think so.
We might have to have a episode coming before this next fall if you're able to come on again. That we might talk coyote strategy right before this fall. We might have to get into some deep details on that. But
yeah, that'd be great.
So what other animals have you been trapping? I see you're in Maine doing some pine marten and some beaver here this last winter.
Yep, I went after fisher, pine marten, caught some weasels, and trapped some beaver. April 4th, I'm flying to Maine, and I'm going to visit. A friend of mine, and people are starting to learn his name. His name is Jason Vance, and I trap with Jason a little bit in western Kansas. He's a Maine resident. He's a heck of a beaver trapper, and I already own the $350 license or whatever it is to trap. So to get the most money out of my license that I paid for, I'm going to go there and beaver trap. And beaver prices being what they are, they're very good. And I need casters. So I might as well go ahead and shoot 2 birds, kill 2 birds with 1 stone on this one. So this is the kind of a year, due to the suppressed fur market, for me to knock out some of these bucket list type of items, things that I'm been wanting to do for a long time. I just wish I was younger and had the energy to go at it like I would like to. So yeah,
how's the marten and fisher trap? Is that I've always, I had Jeremiah Wood on an episode here a few back, and I was talking to him about marten because he really likes to trap marten, and we're talking about are they trap shy? Are they easy to trap? And all this and that and this and that. And I'm thinking, he was telling me about they'd step right on the pan and all this kind of stuff. Was it kind of an adjustment for you versus going after coyote and fox and all that kind of stuff, when sometimes it can be a little more tricky? Or how was your experience with pine marten and fisher?
Well, certainly Jeremiah Wood is just a wonderful resource for trappers. If you guys haven't watched his podcast called Trapping Today, I recommend it. He's just a really nice guy, willing to share and that type of thing. As far as myself, I had experience trapping in big woods when I lived in Virginia, North Carolina. However, it was a total different environment when I went up to Maine. A lot of roads you're traveling fairly slow to because of the road conditions. You're bouncing your pickup about hitting your head on your roof 100 times a day, just bouncing to get to your location sometimes. But my biggest thing, that drawback in Maine, you have to use a lynx exclusion box, and this box. And I guess I'll just recommend to trappers to go on to the Maine Trappers website, or go to Maine Maine out Fish and Wildlife. But you're only allowed a 4-inch hole for a marten or a fisher to enter into with a 120 conibear stuck inside. There is another way you can use a 220 conibear, but that's a different system altogether. But again, it's in a box. So my disadvantage I think I had when I was there is I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine from Maine, his name is Dan, and he's the NTA director for the state of Maine, for the Maine Trappers. And Dan loaned me 60 of his exclusion boxes. Now, I could go out, and now that gives me up to 5 days to check that trap. So that's an advantage. You don't have to check your traps every day with a killer trap in a box. You can catch fisher with a foothold trap, a number 2 size trap. But again, now that you have a foot trap out, you have to check that every day. And I was running 3 different directions between the beaver, the marten, and the fisher, but I had 3 different lines, and I would check my traps every 3rd day. So I would go do beaver one day, I would check line number 1 for fisher and marten on day 2, and I would check on day 3 my 3rd line. So it was impractical for me to actually check a trap in a 24-hour time frame, because I was just going different directions. So if I could do it over again, I think I would design a box that had a piano hinge that actually laid down flat, because I had my car carrying trailer. I guess it's about 20 foot in length, and between my freezer, my traps, I did have my ATV in the back of my truck, but my trailer was loaded with 60 boxes. That's how much room they take. I'm thankful that I brought that trailer with me, because I don't think I could have taken the trailers in if I brought my smaller trailer. So it's a different environment, and I think a guy needs to have 70 boxes per day to check if you want to catch fisher and marten with any kind of consistency, where I was only checking 60 or 30 boxes every day, or 2 days out of 3. So it was a lot of wasted time, if that makes sense, So I would have
sounds refreshing to trap something else,
It was. Trapping in the big woods, the North Woods up there, to share some of you guys don't have to face this, but you're close enough that you probably listen to Canadian broadcasting on your radio, right? I mean, that's the weather. Well, when I'm up there in Maine, I'm listening, their radio stations are broadcasting in French. So you follow what I'm saying. So you're that close to Quebec. So there's different, just a unique experience to fill your day. And you're in some beautiful country. You're in just beautiful country, but it's hard work just to get through your day, if that makes sense. I mean, I lived in a cabin that was off the grid. I did have gas heat, or gas refrigerators. I did have gas stove. The only thing I had to do was cut wood for myself. and we had a generator, but you only ran the generator when you had to run it, right? When you wanted lights or something, when you needed it for an hour, you wouldn't want to spend all that gasoline every single night. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience but it took some planning to get to that stage. But if I could do it over again, I would be running 70, 80 boxes per day on a 3-day check, or 70, 80 boxes on a 4-day check. So in other words, you have four lines. That way you could catch numbers in a short period of time, So my fortune was I caught 4 fish or 4 marten, and it was a wonderful experience, but I could have done better had I had more equipment, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So that, having those experiences trapping different animals, I mean, traveling that distance and doing that, gives a person a lot of perspective on different types of trapping. And, and that's where we're going to go into our next, go into our next topic here. And, one of the goals of myself with this podcast and everything is I want to try to get people educated more with trapping and fur usage and why we do it and how you can get into it and such. Whether it be, trapping, snaring, whether it be water, land, whether it be predator hunting, whatever, running with hounds and stuff like that. I got a hounds guy that I've got set up here possibly in the future to talk a little bit. So, but the question is, and since, we kind of talked about right at the beginning about how a person got into trapping, your dad wasn't a trapper, but you got into with somebody else, and kind of the same situation with myself, and I know that you've had some classes you've taught in the past. You call it the Kansas Canine Mastery class. Yes. And do you still do that, or?
This is the first year in the 6 years I've done it that I'm not holding it, and the only reason is the prices are so low. I don't think I could get my money back out of it. You follow what I mean? I mean, I charged $300 for the weekend, but I also hired, I had 3 instructors also there. So so for every instructor, well, I got to have enough money to cover those guys, if that makes sense. Yeah. And, but I still do the private instruction. I do instruction on my trap line, and I do instruction on your trap line. Whoever wants, it's just a different price. But I think it's important to get people involved, and that's the reason why I only charge the $300, because I was just trying to fit it into people's budget that they could actually make it work. And I even had, if people wanted to, they could camp on my little farm, and wouldn't have to have any money in hotels, and I have a bathroom, and we provided food because the food was also provided in that. So we tried to make it where people didn't have this outlandish price. I will say, and it makes it tough for guys in North Dakota. I know you guys have a wonderful trapping organization. That being said, if a person could ever get a chance to go to a national size of a convention where you had 2 or 3 days of you could be watching all the demos, you could see and talk with all the vendors and that type of a thing. You get a little bit more of a a little bit more hands-on approach to talking to people and trying to learn. I think that'd be great for folks. If I would have gone to a national convention when I was younger, I know I would have been a lot better trapper. I just didn't do it. I went to a state conventions probably when I was in my 30s, so I didn't even do any of this stuff. And I'm certainly not against helping anybody who wants to come my way. As a matter of fact, a lot of the young trappers who come to my business here at the home, when I realize that they are looking for answers, well, shoot, I just stop what I'm doing. I say, okay, let's head out here and let's look at some things. You know what I mean? That extra 30 minutes, you'd be surprised what it can do for you guys. Just just to go out to my fence line or go into my little timber edge and just talk about trapping and what would I do here. Now all of a sudden the student or youthful trapper, then all of a sudden now they have something to wrap their hands around, and then I think it'll make them a better trapper, and make them a better customer of mine. So
yeah. So that's kind of the thing that I've been asking a lot of my guests is that the best way to get somebody into trapping, because a lot of the youth nowadays, up in this area at least, they don't have a lot of family tradition with trapping, and the kids are running, especially the kids. The kids are running around with so many activities now.
Oh
even
yeah,
the hunting and the trapping is suffering in a bit, in my perspective, and trying to figure out a good way to get kids into trapping, because I mean, they might not know what they're missing. Of course, they don't. By doing that, and the education part, but the best way is anyway is what I'm kind of thinking, as far as, like you said, somebody stops by, give them a little instruction, or spread the word on some stuff, and that's kind of what I hope that people will do that, and because we need more trappers. We need more trappers to keep this going. I mean,
we do.
I think there's going to be a wave of trappers in the next few years that, some of that older crowd is, going to probably hang it up or, pass on. And and it's definitely something that is important as far as the trapper goes. So I was just, kind of, when I saw that private instruction that you offer, it's those classes, I always think that's really nice, because I think that sometimes people with their craft or something like that sometimes can get, I'm not going to say possessive, but I'm going to do my own thing, and that's fine. And I respect that too. But at the same time, I think it's important to spread some of that knowledge. So it's kind of nice to see that. So.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. No, they and we're going to have a situation if the fur prices say depressed. There was a lot of trappers that left trapping after '84, and now all of a sudden, I'll have to share a story that my number one customer for giving private instruction to is probably a 55-year-old empty nester. He's getting close. You would think it'd be the 20-year-olds, it'd be the 25. Only a few of those guys take me on. Now, maybe it's because I'm not relatable enough to them or whatever. But that being said, my number one customer for private instruction is probably a man within 10 years of being retired. His kids are grown up enough, and all of a sudden he pulled out his traps that he was cleaning out a barn, and there the traps were, and he thought, gosh, you know what? I sure enjoyed that before I had kids. So the next thing you know he's wanting to, but he also realizes he's lost. He doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. So they'll take the instructions so they can, because a lot of these guys were coon trappers. Let's face it, in the 80s and all that, I mean, $30 to $40 raccoon was very, very possible. Oh, shoot. There was no reason to go for a coyote. Even when the coyotes were worth $100 to $200 out of Montana, let's just say it's $100 for a coyote, just using that. And that's what you guys have experienced for a long time. But if I'm in Missouri or Illinois or Indiana and a coyote is worth $25 for us, I can go out and catch 20 raccoons today. Well, 20, and I could get $20 a raccoon. I could beat that coyote price real quick. Do you follow what I'm saying? So it's a matter of economics. In a good raccoon area. Yeah, so there's some reasons why a lot of guys were so good at being raccoon trappers, and they just focused on raccoon, is because they understood how to get 1,000 raccoons in a year. I mean, that's really good money and very hard to beat, because like I said, when you're in North Dakota, South Dakota, my experience is, whether even into Montana, it's not the same as being in Western Kansas. For you guys, what's a good day's catch for you guys up there? What would be, what is it, 7 coyotes a day? Would that be a good catch?
Well, yeah, I mean, that'd be a pretty good catch. I mean, you'd have to have quite a few sets out, especially it
Yep.
depends on how big of an area, but if you could bring home 5 to 7 a day, that'd be a really good catch, I think.
Okay, gotcha. And so then when you get into the economics, so you get $500, just calling it the $100. Well, all I have to do is really, catch my 20 coons, and I can almost match that. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah, yeah.
but anyway, it's part of what we got. And why am I going to go for a $25 raccoon in Missouri when I can catch, a $20 or a $25 coyote? I might as well go for a $20 raccoon and I think that's the kind of a customer I'm getting today is guys who said, "Well, shit, there ain't no value in raccoons, so let me learn how to coyote trap." So, and there's a lot of guys that have focused on. A lot of these young guys have started out learning how to coyote trap, and all of a sudden they want to learn how to muskrat trap and have no concept of muskrat trapping. And for a guy like myself, well, we all learned on muskrat and then graduated. You know what I mean? So it's kind of reversed today to some degree.
So that's it's when it comes down to that. I mean, I remember when I first started trapping raccoon, and I've probably only been trapping for probably the last it's been within 15 years, but I know that some of those coons were like $30-$35, and I'm like, geez, that's like I had like 20 coons on my trail camera that year. I'm like there was $600 sitting there, and I probably could catch them with all within about 4 days. I mean, I can see where if you're in good, that's economics wise. That I'd rather chase. If a person was out trying to be efficient with that goes. I mean, it doesn't take very much to trap quite a few raccoons versus a wily coyote. So that's something to think about. So we're kind of halfway through our agenda here with our podcast. Got a few more things. We're going to talk about some fur usage and your YouTube channel and your opinion on the future of trapping. But in Kansas, and I know the climate is such that it's not as extreme weather in the winter time as up where I'm at. But is there anybody using fur in Kansas for anything, or do you ever see it used? Or
I personally do not see it used. I know there's a gal around Kansas City that does sew up fur and things like that, but as a rule, I just don't hear of it. When we look at, I think the market right now, if a guy's willing to spend some money, is to go ahead and put up your fur, get it tanned, and then try to sell it on the open market. A guy can still make $150 a coyote if he's willing to go the next step of paying, $25 a pelt to have it processed. And you just don't get to see it the way it used to be. You know what I mean? You turn in 100 coyotes and, get $10,000 and all that. Those days are slipping for right now. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I hear, I suppose it's been a few years now, but I buy fur too and do some fur buying. And when the coyote prices, I mean, we were heavy into coyotes up here. And a few years ago, I started getting into more crafting too, just to kind of, fill in some of my time when the fur buying and trapping season is kind of over. And I think that you're kind of onto something there. And the last episode I did with Rusty Kramer out in Idaho, we talked about it because their auctions get to be quite popular, and there's going to be quite a few buyers that are crafters out there. And I consider myself a crafter also because I make hats and mittens and all that kind of stuff. And I've actually sold more, and I've maybe probably paid more attention to it this year just because the market is such, and I haven't bought as much fur as years past. But I think there's definitely an appetite for finished fur, whether it be, like you said, dress your own skins and sell them 1, 2, 3, 4, or somebody making some pillows or a blanket and stuff like that. And that's very it makes a trapper feel good that you can actually maybe make a little bit extra than just what the wholesale market is right now, which is not very good.
Right.
especially for the higher priced coyotes that we've seen the last 10, 12 years. So I'm hoping that there's a little bit more of a resurgence in that. And I think some of the opinions I've gotten from other people is that there probably is. And I know some of the states possibly like where you're at, where fur usage is not as, not as prominent, but in the same token, some of your fur, which, is probably not quite as heavy, this and that, but it still looks nice, well-handled fur. You guys might have some potential for, some craft sales, so to speak, because, some of these users that use this fur on a daily basis, they're not necessarily, it's a different type of thought process. It's not like, oh, I want the heaviest, thickest, longest for trim or this or that. I mean, they just want something that looks nice, whether it be a semi heavy from Kansas or a Western heavy from North Dakota. So I'm hoping there's a little bit more steam than what there actually is, because that'd be a good sign for us trappers, I think.
I've known of several buyers that, they take their rubbed fur, go ahead and get it tanned. I'm talking about small minor rubs, but they'll actually get it tanned. And they say that a person who owns a cabin and who wants a coyote hanging on the wall, they don't know any different. I hate to talk them down. They don't care. They just wanted that coyote up there. And from their perspective, now is a great time to get some real high quality stuff. I think if a person wants to make some money, we can still continue this. We just have to put a little more money into it, a little more time into it, and we can still figure out how to make some money in this business so we can kind of ride out the low prices right now. So
yeah.
I heard on the radio or on the news that the Canada Goose parka is the number one jacket being stolen in places like New York City. That they literally, they really hold you up and tell you to take the jacket off. So there's still a market. Well, even if it's on the black market, there's still a market for that type of a parka that is still, I still can't imagine that, that if someone else could ever start making the Canada Goose parka in that type of a fashion, why that 4-inch strip of fur still ain't going to make, the hell, that's a $1,300 coat. So
I keep telling people, and this is back when we were really heavy into the trim for Canada Goose, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'd love to have a parka like that, but I'm not going to pay $1,300. But I will tell you that there'd be a lot more people that if you had a nice looking parka with coyote trim like we've had on these coats, you could sell them for $500 and still make a ton of money. Provide an outlet for these trappers, and you'd get your product out there. You'd be able to market a wider population of people, because not everybody's going to be able to afford a $1,300 coat.
That's right.
But there might be a lot of people that can afford a $500 coat.
If you can get that fur tanned, then we have time to work on it. You follow what I mean? Then you have opportunity, but you have to first go the full distance. And that's the beginning of what trappers have to do. Now, the future of trapping in in the southern part of our country, a lot of guys are getting down into Texas. They're going to Mississippi. They're going to Louisiana, and they are getting paid to trap. I understand that there's numbers out there like, well, I make $60 a coyote, or I make $300 a day, and I get to keep the fur. So there's all kinds, and a lot of these are these high dollar, high fence ranches, or you're talking about the Mississippi Delta, where beavers are a problem and otter are a problem, and they're willing to pay you to go trap the otter to keep them out of the catfish ponds. So there is an outlet for people who want to make the road trip down to Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and try to earn a living. And some of those guys are making really good money. I mean, this is all they do in their life is, in trapping is they just, nobody ever skins anything down there as a rule. They're just not, unless it's a good bobcat. That's the market, is to kill them. So from a deprivation standpoint.
Right. So do you think indirectly, with the future of trapping and, not as many people trapping, more animals, there's going to need to be some ADC work out there.
Yeah.
And that might be one of the offshoots of this low fur market, is there needs to be animal damage control still done.
Yeah.
And especially people around. I heard something here a while ago about some of these big turkey states with turkey hunting, and being able to manage all the predators and stuff like that. So, the future of trapping, it might just have to change a little bit, is what it kind of sounds like.
There's a young man who is a guide. They do turkey hunts and they do deer hunts, and he lives not 4 miles down the road from me. And he's a graduate of Arkansas State University, and he's a wildlife biologist. And he did his thesis. He's a doctor. He did his thesis on the decline in the turkey population coincides with the raccoon market dropping. And because not only do you trap the raccoons when you're raccoon trapping, but you're also catching the possum, you're also catching the skunks. That all ties in. So basically, you're killing off egg eaters, allowing turkey populations to flourish. So now all of a sudden, even in where I live here in Kansas, we had a healthy flock of 30 to 40 turkeys on this farm that I trapped, and they continued to be there. And all of a sudden, I stopped trapping that property. It was because the market was wanting better fur. So I said, well, I can't afford to trap here because I ain't making any money. Let me go to Western Kansas, where all of a sudden the coyote's worth $40 again. So I kind of stopped trapping it. Well, I killed myself on the turkeys because there is no turkeys there right now. So once I got out, so did the turkeys. Of course, they just died off from deprivation. So yeah.
Yeah, it's all interesting, and there's a lot of avenues to get there with the trapping part. And I think that the ADC and the fur market and just the game management, and I think that we'll probably see a lot more of that, coming up, especially with, small game hunting. It seems like it's getting to be, very popular with the bird hunting, and people don't want the nest raiders out there. So
yeah.
For anybody that's a skunk trapper, raccoon trapper, and all that type of stuff, that might be good in the years to come, especially if the market stays down and there's not a lot of trappers. Somebody's gonna have to deal with them. So
that's right.
So, I think we're just about ready to wrap up here, Ed. I know that you have you sell lure and bait, and you got a YouTube channel where you publish quite a bit of videos, and I've watched some of those, and there's some really good content. Do you have anything really to add on that? I mean, I know you've been in the lure and bait business for quite a while, or
so as far as the business side of it, whether we're talking YouTube or Facebook or my own website, my website's called KansasTraplineProducts.com. That's how you can find me. And I sell baits and lures. I sell other things such as flesh and knives. And the only thing I really don't carry is traps right now. And I've had to kind of back off on the snares because the snares have, with the steel prices, they've gone up too. So it made me less competitive. That being said, I started that in 2012. The YouTube, you can find me by typing in Ed Schneider trapping, or just put in trapping Kansas coyotes, and you'll probably find me on that level. And love to have you like and subscribe to my videos. That being said, my whole purpose of the YouTube videos, well, besides brand awareness, but my purpose of it was to put out honest trapping information. I don't sit there and hold up a bottle of lure and say, well, this is what you need to buy. I don't do that. I just want to talk about the set. Why am I here? And I happen to be using High Hills Gland Lure at this set. I mean, it's just letting the guys know. But I think that is where we're at now. And of course, I share that information on Facebook as well. But I think that is what's shrinking the world. But at the same token, it's allowing this small population of trappers in the United States to somewhat still be connected through others, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I actually started the YouTube channel when I saw a young, I'm going to call him a 12 to 15-year-old, somewhere in there. I saw him doing a YouTube channel on coyote trapping, and I realized that, well, I'll just put it this way. He didn't know what he was talking about. I understood he was more interested in just getting likes and subscription without good content. And then I clicked on a few other guys, and all of a sudden I realized there was a lot of young trappers or young gentlemen that were trying to tell you how to trap. And in my opinion, I only saw a few of them back it up. So I said, well, if that's the direction we're going, let me put out what I feel is, 40 years or 50 years of good trapping experience. And hopefully, you can compare my stuff to others, but I do try to give you my honest feedback for how I trap, if that makes sense, without a lot of fluff put into it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've watched a few, and I think it's really good. And just from another trapper to you, thank you for putting that stuff out there, because I think that more information to help people be better trappers, and the education part's a big thing for myself as far as educating the right way, factual based stuff. I think it's very valuable, and I think good content equals a good end product. So,
yeah. Now I'm looking at our schedule here, and it's kind of opening up for other topics that kind of came up. But let's get down. I talked about the future of trapping in one of my videos, in my YouTube, and I proposed on YouTube, and I'm just trying to get people to think and to talk about this. But trapping is a profession, like farming was in the 60s or 70s, to where it was an individual act of work that you did, and you buy corn seed, you plant the corn, you market the corn, and you hope to get what you could get. But what the farmers did is they started up with pig farming. They started a thing, went through a bad trend in hog farming, where they considered pork a fatty red meat. And this is going through a time when the poultry, pork was losing to the poultry industry, because it was deemed that chicken was healthier than pork. And then, so what the pork industry had to do is they had to change their image. And to me, that rings resolutely true with trappers. Somehow or another, we have to change our image in some manner to make it fashionable or a good thing to be a trapper. And what the pork industry did is they actually started a pork checkoff. And basically, 3 cents out of every $100 of pork sold goes towards the pork checkoff. So every pork producer has 3 cents per $100 taken out of their check at the time of market. And I was proposing perhaps that fur trappers could turn right around, and when they sell their fur, let's just say that we say $1 for every $100 of fur sold. So I sell the fur to you and you give me me and you agreed that I would receive $300. What you would do at the point of transaction is you would take I would only get a check for $297. And then you would do this with trapper after trapper, but then you would mail the money that you withheld from my first sale into a fur checkoff, and that fur checkoff being designated to encourage the use of fur, to make our image better, to fight antis in different states that's limiting our markets, such as Los Angeles and even in New York. So I know that sounds kind of off the wall, but my thought is this way, every trapper has an opportunity to promote what we're doing, and not just have Groenwald promote what we do or Italy promote what we do. It's very hard in the United States to get fur sold. So that's the reason why we're using countries like China and countries like Russia. And we know exactly how we stand between the United States and China and Russia today. So unless we can change some kind of attitude, I think the first step is for us to invest in our own business. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox now, but
well, thanks for interjecting that. That's an interesting point of view. And I'm writing that one down because we might have to revisit that later.
I would be happy to. And I have proposed it to the folks at the NTA, and I proposed it to the fur harvesters. I am not trying to cut out the fur buyers. I am just simply stating the best time for you for me to pay the rent on my mortgage is for you to show up the day I get paid, right? And the best time, and I go to these state conventions. Let's just change this. Let's just stop here a second. When I go to the Kansas fur harvesters, or the Fur Harvesters Association, we'll have between 300 and 400 trappers show up for that day. But I bet you money that there's probably 1,000 to 5,000 trappers that actually trap in Kansas. Well, why is 300 people doing the work for 1,000 to 5,000 people is my point. The same thing would apply with Pennsylvania and New York, and even though they have wonderful organizations, but we cannot sell enough raffle tickets to support our industry at a trapper convention. I think that it would be prudent for us to invest on payday $1 out of every $100 earned to go towards we'll just use the fur harvesters. I'm picking on them, but they turn right around. What could they make in here? Would they get $200,000 nationwide? I'm just using that as an example. But say they had $200,000. That fur harvesters, the first thing we'd want to do as an example, and we'll have fur buyers on the board. I'm not, we'll have trappers on the board. We'll have some fur buyers, Groenwald or any other company that wants to be involved. But I think that $200,000, say we start with $100,000 going toward product development, where the fur trappers are actually buying fur, getting it tanned, sending it to a finisher, and then getting it into the hands of some of these fur companies and say, look, I'm giving you free fur. Make us the next Canada Goose parka. Do you follow what I'm saying? You just make it. We're giving you the fur for free. It's $100,000 worth. It's a nest egg. Let's get it in the market. Now then you got another $100,000 on the table, and then you just got to figure out how much of it goes to fight the New Mexico antis. How much of it, you know what I mean, to the anti. So let's just say we can contribute now 50,000. 100% directed to fighting the anti-trappers of our country, and because we can't raise $50,000 selling raffle tickets, I guarantee you we can't. So that's
interesting, really interesting topic. Yeah. I said, that's
and I'll even say to your podcast listeners, leave a comment for Garrett so that way he can. Or, I want to get people talking about it, because I can't I've had a lot of people offer to send me money, and I said, no. I do not have those types of contacts, but I'll bet you Guy Gronwald does. I'll bet you people with the fur harvesters do. You follow what I'm saying? We don't need to be the United States government where we bring in $200,000 and then what do they do with it? They go off somewhere and use it as a business trip, right? I mean, we need it to be not like the federal government. We need that money dedicated to the preservation of our industry, changing the viewpoint and the value of what we do. I think we still have a shot to do something, but we have to begin it sooner than later.
Well, that viewpoint's interesting, and I'll tell you what, I think I'm gonna wrap up the episode with that point of view, Ed, because that's a good one to think about. And I think when people listen to this, it's something that I really haven't heard about before, and it makes a lot of sense. And of course, there's lots of details and stuff to talk about more, but that's definitely interesting. And thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So, Ed Schneider with Kansas Trapline Products. I really appreciate you taking some time this evening to talk about all this stuff we talked about. I mean, I always like to talk with new people and get their point of view on things, whether it be coyote trapping or whatever we talked about. So I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time.
Thank you, Garrett. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, and hopefully that if I email you in the future, you'd be able to come on again and talk some other stuff, because you've been a great guest and a plethora of information. So thank you again for coming on.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to the next time we meet.
Okay. So, folks, that was episode 7. Ed Schneider with Kansas Trapline Products. Great episode. Lots of good information there. You can catch Ed on his website. He's got a Facebook page, YouTube channel. Check him out. He's got a lot of information there. He sells some lures, some bait. He's got some really good videos on YouTube, trapping related. So I'm sure he's got some contact information on there if you want to contact him and ask him a few questions. If you have any questions for me or this episode podcast, you can send me an email at info@volkfurs.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. I do post some pictures of some fur accessories that I do make on Instagram, and I do share some stuff on Facebook. I also have an Etsy page that I do sell some fur accessories on there. So take a look at that if you're interested at all. So thank you for listening. Until next time, take care. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the most recent episode of the Volkfurs podcast. If you have any questions or comments, suggestions, please email me at info@volkfurs.com. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, or you can contact me via my website at volkfurs.com.